Buy-to-let investing can make you stinking rich, but only if you learn the fundamentals first. Otherwise, you won't know the difference between a property deal that can make you go broke and a deal that can build ridiculous wealth over decades. Some things are often overlooked by beginners, and there are also some massive risks that you need to be aware of. We'll break down the buy-to-let investing basics in a simple way and cover the pitfalls that you need to know, so you can leave this video feeling more confident about property investing. But if you don't want to get left behind in property, you need to keep up with fast-moving changes in the property market. You can do this by joining the weekly Beacon property newsletter, and for now, it's free to join. You can use the link in the description to sign up. So what is a buy-to-let? Well, a buy-to-let investment is when you buy a property with the intention to rent it out. But how do you get a buy-to-let property? Well, normally people will either use cash or use a mortgage, but most investors will use a mortgage, and in this case, a special mortgage called a buy-to-let mortgage. You can either get these interest only or as a repayment mortgage. As a beginner, you might think that a repayment mortgage is actually better because you pay down the debt over time. However, most wealthy investors use an interest-only buy-to-let mortgage. There are some key differences between using a mortgage and using cash, but for the purposes of this video, just know that for most people, using a mortgage is going to be better. We'll go into some of the details why later on. After you've got the property, what you need to do is make sure you've got all the regulatory things done. This includes things like gas safety, electrics, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, and the EPC rating. You'll also want to get insurance sorted out for your property too. When the property is up to scratch, you find a tenant to live in the property. You can either do this yourself or use a letting agent. Then you rent out this property to that tenant. While they're in the property, you can either manage the tenancy yourself, or again, you can use a managing agent to do it for you. Different investors have different viewpoints on this, but a lot of people use a managing agent because it allows them to free up their own time to work on other things. If you use a managing agent, they'll probably take about 10 to 12% of the monthly rent, but at least you won't be getting calls at 2 AM in the morning. During the tenancy, you need to keep up with maintenance. So if anything goes wrong, obviously you need to fix it. If you have a managing agent, they will do most of this for you and they can just bill you for the costs. When the tenant leaves, you need to fill the house again. And then you rinse and repeat this process. And every month, a tenant will be paying you monthly rent. And every so often, you spruce up the property too to keep it up to scratch. And if you've done your research correctly, the monthly rent that you've been receiving should be more than the mortgage payment that you have. But before you do any of this, you need to make sure that your numbers stack up. This means that you work out your return on investment for the property over time. We'll make another video on this to break it down properly, but as a very quick example, say you bought a 100k property. You'd have a deposit of around £25,000 and you'd spend around another £5,000 in fees. So your initial investment would be around 30k and you'd have a mortgage of around 75k. With a 6% mortgage interest rate on an interest-only mortgage, your monthly interest would be around £375 and your yearly payments would be about £4,500, and you might be able to get a monthly rent of around £650 per month or £7,800 per year. Obviously this will vary area to area. This would leave a yearly profit of around £3,300. To work out your return on investment, you take your yearly profit and divide it by the initial investment. So you do £3,300 divided by £30,000, and this gives you 11%. So your return on investment is around 11%. And that's only the beginning. Over time, rent inflation means your rents go up, so your monthly rental profit actually gets larger. And house prices tend to go up over time too, so you get capital growth. But are these rewards actually worth it? Well, let's get into the benefits of buy-to-let. First up is inflation. It erodes the value of your money. So £100 today might get you £100 worth of goods and services. But that same amount of money in 20 years won't get you the same level of goods and services. But in buy-to-let, inflation actually helps you. Because most people use a mortgage, that means you're taking on debt. But over 25 years, inflation has actually eroded the value of that loan. One of the other biggest benefits of buy-to-let is leverage. Leverage is when you borrow money. So in our example using a mortgage, we are using leverage. because we only put down a minimum deposit of around 25%. But why does leverage actually help you? Well, think of it this way. Say you went to the bank and you said, I want 100k and I want to put it into Bitcoin. The bank will probably tell you to do one. But when it comes to houses, it's different. You can ask for 500,000 as a mortgage and the bank will give it to you, as long as you meet the other requirements, of course. So think of it this way. If you had £25,000 as a deposit in cash, you can own an asset worth 4 times that much, about £100,000, and receive the rental income in line with that value. Another massive benefit of buy-to-let is that someone else is actually paying your interest payments for you, so you're not actually doing anything. Speaking of interest payments, buy-to-let mortgages are typically low interest rate loans because they're mortgages. Now they are higher than residential mortgages most of the time because they're seen as higher risk. However, if you compare it to something like a business loan or a car loan or a credit card, the interest rate is much lower. So in other words, it's cheap money. And while you hold on to this property, you also get capital growth over time. Capital growth is when the house price increases in value over time, also known as capital appreciation. So when you buy the property, it might be £100,000, but in 25 years, it will be worth a lot more. Another secret benefit that people aren't really aware of is tax-free money. So what does this mean? Well, when you have a mortgage, you have debt. So when you have a property that's increased in value because of capital growth, you can actually make use of this extra value. So any extra value that you've accrued in the property, you can extract this as a debt. And when you take a debt, it's tax-free. This is different to if you just sold the property, because when you sell a property, you pay things like capital gains tax. We'll have a video on this topic in the future, so make sure you subscribe so you know when it comes out. But this is actually one of the biggest risks too. If you keep pulling debt out, that means you're leveraging yourself over and over again. And some people end up over leveraging. This is when they keep borrowing more and more money and they're put at risk that the property values decline so much or interest rates go so high that they just can't keep up with the monthly payments. Another risk is that prices can come down in a falling market, but not as quick and as much as other types of investments. And luckily you are still receiving an income. And you only really lose the money if you actually sell. So if your property drops by say £20,000 but your rent is still the same and you can still meet your mortgage payments, you don't actually make a loss unless you actually sell the property. And if you wait long enough, property is quite forgiving in that house prices do go up in the long run. Unfortunately, buy-to-let isn't for everyone because it does take a lot of capital to get started. The average person in the UK doesn't have a lot of savings, but to get into a buy-to-let property, you do need at least 25% of the property value, plus a few thousand more for other fees. Even a really cheap property of about £80,000, you'd still need at least £20,000 just for the deposit, which for some people is a lot of money and can take a lot of time to get started. However, for other types of investments, you wouldn't need £20,000 just to get started. You could get started with just having £2,000 in your bank account, or even £200 or even £20. Another downside of buy-to-let investment is that it is less liquid than other forms of investment. What this means is that it takes a long time to enter and exit any investments. So if you want to sell a property, this can take months. Whereas if you wanted to just withdraw from a stocks and shares ISA, it can take a few days. This can be a problem for some people, especially if all of their assets are tied up in the investment. And if they suddenly need that money, then this can put them at risk. If they want to sell the property to make use of the money, then they might need to sell it at a reduced rate, which would actually damage their investment that they worked so hard to achieve. But what's the biggest mistake? The biggest mistake is picking the wrong areas and the wrong type of house. Because when you do this, you end up with long voids and bad tenants. And when you have long voids, that means you're losing money every single month, instead of actually getting the rental income that should be paying your interest payments. And when you have bad tenants, this leads to extra additional costs that you don't really want. For example, maybe they mess up the house, leading to lots of refurbishment works. Or even worse, maybe they stop paying their rent, and it can take a long time to get rid of tenants that aren't paying rent. This can lead to a lot of losses, and eventually you might have to get rid of the house altogether. But luckily, it's not too hard to figure out what areas are good places to invest, where you'll get good capital growth over the long term, and you'll have good rental demand, so that you'll always have a tenant in place that's going to pay you rent every month. Here's an analogy to help make it stick. Imagine if someone said, here's a £500,000 asset, but only give me 25%. I'll give you a loan for the rest. Oh, and the interest rate is lower than other types of loans, and somebody else can pay off the interest for you. Oh, and the value of the property will probably increase a lot over the term of the loan. And the monthly payments from your tenant will increase too. And inflation means that your initial mortgage is worth less at the end of the loan term. So in essence, you have a low interest loan on an appreciating asset with monthly income that grows over time, and the debt is eroded by inflation. You'd bite their arm off. So where do you buy and what type of property? Well, this does depend on your strategy. If you just want cash flow, then you can focus on areas with high rental demand for private rental properties. But if you want capital growth, you want to look at different areas where there's more owner-occupiers, where people want to buy to live. Because in these areas, house prices tend to appreciate the most. And if you want something in between, you need to find a balance. We will have an in-depth video on this at some point, so make sure you like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified as soon as this video comes up.